Our speaker tonight, Anthony Scaramucci, was born in Long Island, has a BA in economics from Tufts University, and a Juris Doctor from Harvard. He worked at Goldman Sachs out of college before founding Oscar Capital Management. After selling Oscar Capital Management, he founded SkyBridge Capital in 2005, a global alternative investment firm where he is the managing partner presently. Through SkyBridge in 2009, he founded the SALT Conference, which takes place annually in both Abu Dhabi for the first time this year and Las Vegas, where it's occurred before. The SALT Conference is committed to facilitating balanced discussions and debates on macroeconomic trends, geopolitical events, and alternative investment opportunities. A couple of Anthony's many recognitions include being named one of the 100 most powerful people in global finance, an Entrepreneur of the Year in New York. He's the vice chair of the Kennedy Center Corporate Fund Board and a trustee of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Foundation. Anthony has also written 4 books: Goodbye, Gordon Gekko, The Little Book of Hedge Funds, Hopping Over the Rabbit Hole, and most recently, Trump, the Blue Collar President. With his political experience and knowledge of the global financial industry, I look forward to hearing what Mr. Scaramucci has to say this evening. Please give me a warm hand in welcoming Mr. Scaramucci to the podium.
It's a big honor to be here. Everybody hear me okay? If you can hear me okay, then I'm not going to stand at the podium. Podium might be a little bit too tall for me. I'm just looking at this podium. It's like one of the fun things about Mayor Bloomberg is he always cut the podiums down here, you know. It was very, very well designed for the mayor. So what I thought I would do, and I had the opportunity to speak here, I guess about 6 years ago, right, Mark? I think it was 2013. We were over at the country club, and we talked a lot about the macro economy. I'm happy to... all right, we'll figure out. I'll get it right here. Maybe we'll just stand in one location. But I thought this would be a little bit more fun to talk about some personal economic travails. I think it'd be a little bit more interesting. And then we could obviously talk about politics if people want to do that. I have no idea how I got into politics. I mean, that happens to people, I guess. It was accidental for me. But in 2003, I was just, a commentator on CNBC. I had no idea that it was going to end up where I am 6 years later. So when I'm teaching or I'm speaking at a college, I always say to kids, you're making your plans and God's laughing, and all of a sudden your life goes in a direction that you have no idea where it's going to go. But as an entrepreneur, one of the things you have to do is you have to be incredibly adaptive, and you have to think about it as it's changing. You have to make your adjustments as well. And then one of the biggest things you have to do is sort of admit when you're doing things that are really stupid. And so you guys probably know I've done some really stupid things. So we're going to talk about some of those tonight. But I want to take you back to how I grew up, because I think it's elemental to all of us in a lot of ways in terms of how we see the world. When you're growing up a certain way and you have a certain fixture of parents and role models, you start to see the world a certain way. And for my parents, they were blue-collar people. My parents never went to college. My dad was a crane operator. He worked in Local 986, which was a union out on Long Island. He got paid by the hour. But the very good news for us is that he got a great job at a time when that job was in demand and the wages were very high. And so we lived a great blue-collar / middle-class lifestyle. I was telling these young ladies over here how lucky I was. We had a small house. My brother and I shared the same room. We were beating up on each other, typical stuff. But we had enough. There was a Schwinn bicycle that we shared. There were air conditioners getting taken in and out of the windows. There was macaroni on Sundays to the point of explosion. It was that sort of a home. But the ambition level in the home was work with your hands. And the ambition level was, you would do something trade-oriented. And then my father met somebody who had gone to Tufts University. When he got a little older, they let him weigh trucks at this construction company that he spent 42 years at. So he came off the crane, he was weighing trucks, and this gentleman that was selling crushed aggregate to the construction company said, well, what are your kids going to do? And he was telling him, he said, well, no, you should send them to this school called Tufts. So my father came home and he said to my older brother, you guys are going to school called Tufts. Toughs. He said, okay. So my brother looks it up in the Barron's book. Some of you guys are old enough to remember that Barron's book. And we got to Tufts, and my brother said, hey, Dad, this is like a most selective school. How are we going to get into that school? My brother had pretty good grades. I had not as good as my brother at that time. I got a little smarter when I got to school. But we both ended up getting in there, and maybe his friend actually helped us. I don't know. But that was a very big breakthrough moment for me, because now I'm at Tufts. We couldn't really afford it. And my dad did something I will never forget, and I wrote about it in one of my books. It was April of 1982, and he handed me a $10,000 check. And I said, okay, what's this? He said, well, I cashed in my union life insurance contract. This is the cash value on my life insurance, and it's a $24,000 tuition at Tufts, and this is all I got. So here's the $10,000, and this will help you get started. And something about that moment in my life, it was like I got hit in the head with a rock. I was like, okay, I really can't disappoint my mom and dad. I'm going to go to school. I mean, I was driving around in the Camaro. It was a full Guido Long Island experience with the power boosters, and I was doing all the stuff that you would expect somebody to do in 1981. But by April of 1982, it dawned on me that I was going to take this stuff seriously. So I went to Tufts. I worked super hard. I got into Harvard. And there's another joke in the family. I probably don't believe this, but it's totally true. My mother thought that was Hartford. I mean, these people didn't read, right? So I called her. I said, I'm going to Harvard. She says, okay, we're going to Connecticut. I said, no, Ma, it's in Boston. She goes, why the hell would they call it Hartford if it's not in Hartford? That was my mother, right? So it was like a totally full-blown dysfunctional Italian family. And so now I'm at Harvard. I decide I'm not going to be a lawyer. I'm interviewing at Goldman Sachs. And I just want to give you the image. It's 1987. I am wearing a 100% polyester black suit. But that's not enough. I have a 100% polyester white shirt on underneath the black suit. And then I had this very thin black polyester Guido tie. I mean, I was fully flammable for that first interview. I mean, if a spark went off in the room, it would have been really bad for those Goldman Sachs partners, right? And so I'm in the room, and they're asking me questions, and I'm answering the questions, and they're asking me questions. Finally, the guy gets up and says, hey, can I see you for a second? He puts his arm around me, and he says, I just have to tell you, you're a smart kid. You're the worst dressed person that we've ever met. And I was Traverse City cherry red, right? I mean, I was bright red. I was mortified, right? And I looked at him, and I said, wow. I said, what do I do? He says, well, I don't know what you're going to do, but you got to go to like Brooks Brothers and buy some like natural fiber suits, okay? And you got to get yourself a good shirt, and I'm going to bring you down to Goldman Sachs for this job interview, but you can't look like Tony Manero from Saturday Night Fever in the job interview. So when I called my parents, my mother was like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. You look fantastic, right? That's your Italian mother for you, right? And so I said, Ma, I don't think I look that fantastic, to be honest, after the conversation. So why am I leading with this? Because my start to get to where I am was a very awkward, very insecure start. There was a lot of self-consciousness in it. There was a lot of uncertainty and doubt. And I was experimenting. I didn't have a dollar. I had probably $100,000 of school debt between Tufts and Harvard. I was at Goldman Sachs, and I didn't really have a network. And I started as an FA, the way Mark is at Morgan Stanley. And so they gave me a desk, a phone, and they gave me a stack of cards. And they said, okay, you're going to have to start meeting wealthy people and convincing them to have their money managed at Goldman. I said, okay, I have to figure out how to do that. But I didn't have a network. I didn't have a country club, never hit a golf ball, never hit a tennis ball. And so what I did was I wrote a check to a guy that was running for mayor in 1989 by the name of Rudy Giuliani. Anybody remember him? Okay, so I wrote a check to him. It was a pretty expensive check at that time, but it got me into his campaign. And I started meeting people in New York as a result of that. And then Rudy Giuliani, he lost that first race. I don't know if people remember that, but he lost to David Deakins in '89, and then he won in '93. But now I was in the political process. I wrote a check to George Pataki. I don't know if you guys remember him. He was the governor. And I wrote a check to Senator Alphonse Samana. I was a Republican, so I was writing these different checks. And what was happening is it was opening up a whole window for me of networking opportunities, and a lot of the people that I met on that process started becoming my clients. I'm telling you this because that's how I got into politics. It wasn't like I woke up one morning and said, okay, I'm going to be 55 years old, or at that time before I got fired from the White House, I was 53 years old, and I'm going to be the White House communications director. I didn't think that at all. I thought, okay, this is a way for me to meet people and to create networking opportunities. And the last part of this story, then we'll segue into where we are in the future, but the last part of the story is that when I left to start my first business, I promised myself, I wrote a note to myself that the day that I became debt-free, student loan free, I was going to leave Goldman Sachs and start my own business. And so literally on December 1st, 1996, 7 years after I started at Goldman, I left to start my first company. I was 32 years old, and for the younger people in this room, I'll just be very honest, I had so much anxiety over the Thanksgiving weekend about starting my own business and having no safety net and had no idea how we're going to take something from 0 and turning it into 1, that I got myself sick over that weekend. I literally had like a respiratory infection, and I went to work my first day with a fever. And just to give you a sense for the level of uncertainty, remember, I didn't have a safety net. And frankly, at that point, my parents were starting to rely on me a little bit where I was helping them. Okay, so why am I bringing all of this up? I'm framing it for you because it ties back into the president in the following respect. So I'm going to fast forward. It's 30 years later, or 28 years later. I've worked for Governor Romney. I did give money, in full disclosure, to President Obama because we were in law school together. And his friends that were friends of mine in law school asked me, but I donated some money to President Obama. I didn't like his regulatory strategy, not a bad guy. He invited me and my wife to his Christmas parties. I've been to more Barack Obama Christmas parties than Donald Trump Christmas parties, imagine that. But I did give him some money. And again, I gave it under the theory that it was going to help me in business, and it wasn't that big of a deal. And then I worked for Governor Romney. And then on the day after the Apprentice finale, I got a call from Donald Trump the week prior. He said, I want to meet you, have breakfast with me in my office. I said, okay, no problem. It was the day after the Apprentice finale. I go to Mr. Trump's office, 26th floor Trump Tower. If you've ever been in that office, his desk is here, your chair is there. I don't know if you guys know that. So you're looking up at him. You feel like you're like Elf, in the movie, right? You're like looking up at him. And he's there, and he says, okay, Anthony, you're really good on TV. You know how he talks. I'm done with Did you see me on The Apprentice last night? I was amazing on The Apprentice last night. Did you see me? I said, no, sir, I didn't see you. You were the only one that didn't see me. Everyone saw me. I was unbelievable. And he said, but I'm done with the television. I'm going to now run for president. I hired Corey Lewandowski. I've got a team downstairs, and I'm going to run for president. I said, well, come on, I know you, that's a publicity stunt. You're not running for president. I said, you're going to raise money, use this as a publicity stunt. Are you writing another book? What are you doing? He says, oh, you see, you're like everybody else. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to run for president. I'm going to shoot to the top of the polls. And I'm going to stay at the top of the polls until I win the presidency. Okay, so he actually did that. Okay, if you go and study what happened, that's exactly what happened. And so I said, well, listen, I'm with Jeb Bush at that time. I was with Governor Walker. He came out of the race very quickly. I was with Jeb Bush. I said, listen, I'm with Jeb Bush. He says, oh, I'm going to kill Jeb Bush. I said, okay. I said, well, if you beat Jeb Bush and you want me to come work for you after that, I'll come work for you. And so I did. And so now I'm going to take you to Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I told this story this morning, so forgive me if you heard it this morning, but I think it's really important. I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico at my first Trump campaign rally. I saw something at the Trump campaign rallies that we didn't see at the Jeb rallies. That was people, ladies and gentlemen. There were tons of them. Okay, and so I'm there, and I've got the Secret Service pin on. If you've ever traveled with the president, the Secret Service gives you this bright red pin. And it's designed for if the shooting starts, they see the pin, they don't shoot at you. So for the first 2 weeks, I'm like holding my shirt up like this. See the pin, I don't want to get shot, right? Then you get used to it, and now I don't want anybody to know that I'm with the presidential detail, so I take the pin off, put it in my pocket, and I cross into the crowd, away from the security perimeter, and I walk into the crowd, and I start talking to people like, where are you from? Why are you here? What brings you here to this arena? And the invariable messaging from those people were something like this. Well, I lost my job. There was a factory about 6 miles from here. It closed down. My dad was at that factory for 30 years. I was there for 12. I lost my job. And so I'm delivering Domino's Pizza at night. I'm working at Lowe's, the home improvement store, during the day. My wife's a dental technician. I'm here because Mr. Trump says he's going to bring the jobs back. And I don't think these other politicians are capable of doing that. So I'm here. I'm going to vote for Mr. Trump. By the way, Anthony, you think you're in New Mexico? You're not in New Mexico. New Mexico? Okay, that would be Mexico. Because all of these factories moved across the border after the signing of NAFTA, and they moved into Mexico. And there's a lot of people in here that are in manufacturing, you know this. We lost 65,000 factories in the United States after the signing of NAFTA over the last 25 years. And so I'm tying this back to my family because it was at that moment I looked around and I said, oh my God, Mr. Trump is talking to the people I grew up with. People didn't go to Tufts, they didn't go to Harvard, they're working in a trade somewhere, they're putting up sheetrock, they're plumbing. 2 of my cousins are working a clamming boat out in Oyster Bay. 1 of my cousins is installing auto glass. My cousin Harry has a deli. You know, at Christmas Eve, I'm like Anthony Hedge Fund. There's like 20 Anthonys in the family, right? So we have Anthony Auto Glass, we have Anthony Deli, I'm Anthony Hedge Fund, right? I mean, you all get treated the same at Christmas Eve, trust me. And I went back to New York. And about a week later, I went to the Harvard Law School Leadership Council meeting. I've been on the Harvard Law School Leadership Council, where I had the opportunity 25 years ago to meet Elizabeth Warren. Somebody asked me a question about her, I'll give you my opinion. And I'm on the Harvard Law School Leadership Council. It's a couple of weeks later. It's right after the Brexit. It's the day after the Brexit. So it's mid-June, late June 2016. There are 25 people at the table. The dean walks in. She's a woman. She was my civil procedure professor. She sits down and she says, hey, I just got back from London. I met with Prime Minister Cameron, Chancellor of the Exchequer Osborne, tons of alumni from Harvard. Not one person said that there was going to be a Brexit. Not one person. What do you guys think happened? So I raised my hand. I said, Dean, I mean this with all due respect, and this is an admission that I want to share with everybody in this room. I missed it. You see what happened to me? I left my home, I went to Tufts and Harvard, and I began the ascent of living the American dream. I started going up the spire of financial independence. I started hanging out with very wealthy people, and I started going to the World Economic Forum or country clubs or seminars or meeting with Goldman Sachs partners that became my clients when I left Goldman Sachs. And I started insulating myself with the confirmed biases of the very wealthy. And so I was leaving behind and missing the actual situation on the ground for the people that I grew up with. And so I raised my hand, and I said that to the dean, I said that to my fellow leadership council members. I said, listen, I mean this with no due respect, but has anybody been to a Donald Trump rally? Nobody said that they had. I said, what about a Bernie Sanders rally? Anybody been there? Nobody raised their hand. And I submit to you guys that there were only 2 candidates in 2016 that actually saw what I'm describing to you. It was Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. They saw this economic anxiety. So now I'm back on the campaign. I said, well, that's going on in Manchester, the United Kingdom, Liverpool, the Upper Highlands. Those people are rejecting globalism, and they're embracing nationalism because of their economic anxiety and their fear. Okay, so now I'm back on the campaign. And I showed the president, or then the candidate, an analysis of my dad's 1976 wages, and the same member of the same union on Long Island. By the way, those jobs are now, there's a third of them. So the jobs, the opportunity, the opening is actually down 67%. But that same local crane engineer, that same operator, the 2016 wages versus 1976, down 26.5% in real economic terms. So I said, hey, Mr. Trump, this is impossible. You're not going to be able to afford to live the way I grew up in that situation. And so, again, whether you like the president or don't like the president, I'm happy to tell you where I am with the president now. I'm happy to share that with you. but he saw something that these other politicians didn't see. There was a malpractice or a vacuum of advocacy for blue-collar and middle-class people by both establishment Republicans and establishment Democrats. And who's ever going to win the 2020 election, and I said this to Bill Maher on one of the commercial breaks, or we were in his post-party production, I said, hey, don't call these people deplorable. Don't call them white nationalists or ethnocentrics. They're people. They just want jobs. They just want to help their kids. They want to do better. Okay, and we have to figure out, we have to be responsible with our policy and our advocacy to figure this out. And the person that does that the best, in my opinion, will win in 2020. Okay, that's my honest opinion. But why am I bringing all this up? Because people have said to me, well, why'd you join the Trump campaign? You're more of a moderate Republican. It had to do with my family of origin. It had to do with what I was seeing, and it had to do with my biases as a kid, the transformation of those biases as an adult as I became more wealthy, and where we are today as a society. Okay, I want to talk about one more thing, and I know I've got some time, so I'm going to take questions after I talk about this. We're on the campaign, and Stephen Mnuchin and I are close friends, and he says to me, okay, we got to brief the candidate on trade. And you're a good storyteller, and I'm here to provide value and insight for the economic club. The president has a short attention span. See, I'm providing value and insight, right? Like you guys didn't know that. And so then Steve turns to me and says, you're a good storyteller, so you're going to brief the president on trade. And you got about 3 minutes. Okay, well, I'm Italian, you can't do anything in 3 minutes. Okay, everybody knows that, right? So now I'm sitting across from him on the campaign plane at the desk, or it's literally like a table, his dining room table on the plane, the Trump plane. And I'm going to tell you what I told him. I can't do it in 3 minutes, but I can probably do it in 5. I'm going to explain to you where we are. And many of you know this already, but the president has a short attention span. He's not a great reader. I don't think that's anything new. But he's a good listener if you can catch him on a story. So, Mr. President, let me tell you a story. It involves Richard Nixon. It's 1947. It's March of 47. And Richard Nixon goes to Europe with a group of congressmen. They've all been elected to the House. He's a Republican. There are many Democrats on the trip. It's a bipartisan trip. Europe is absolutely devastated. Western Europe has been annihilated. There are people starving in the streets. There are people looting. It's unsecure areas of places like Berlin, and it's devastating. At the same time that that's going on in 46, Stalin is already moving on Eastern Europe. He's already abrogating the agreement that he made with Roosevelt, who passed away in April of 1945. And now the United States and the West is fearful that Stalin is going to take over Western Europe. So they come up with a plan. What are they going to do? They're going to help rebuild Western Europe. And so Dean Acheson comes up with the plan. He turns to Harry Truman. He says, okay, we're going to name this the Truman Plan. Harry Truman said, well, they hate me on Capitol Hill. We can't name it the Truman Plan. He goes, okay, well, I came up with the idea. Let's name it the Acheson Plan. He goes, hey, they hate you more than they hate me. So we know what we're going to call it? We're going to call it the Marshall Plan. See, that's the 5-star general, the chief of staff of the Army. And so they gave the plan to George Marshall. He gave a speech at a podium like this in Harvard University. And what was the plan? $14 billion into Europe and North Asia, rebuild these areas, infrastructure, roads, factories. This was a grant, ladies and gentlemen. You want to think about America, how much you love your country. After you hear about what we did in the Marshall Plan, you love your country more. We gave them the money to rebuild because we knew it would be very good for us. It would lead to peace and prosperity and stability around the world. So we gave them $13.7 billion. To put it in context of today, it's $190 billion. If you want to measure it on GDP, which I think is the most important way to do it, as a percentage of GDP on today's GDP, it's about $900 billion. A massive infrastructure build for Europe. It's the first time in history where a vanquishing nation repaired the vanquished nation. Okay, the second thing that we did is that we made the trading system, the global trading system, completely unfair and very uneven. So let me tell you what we did. We said to countries, we said, hey, here's the deal. You can bring your goods and services into the United States. No problem. We'll lightly tax them, we'll lightly quota them, we'll lightly tariff them. Our goods and services, you can embargo them. You can tax and tariff them. No problem. You can set up protectionist measures in your countries to protect your labor market, to create a burgeoning middle class for your countries. So we made the trading system very, very unfair. Now, why do we do that? Our grandparents said, well, we're 1.5% of the population. It's 1947, 48. We're 65% of the world's output. We're the most powerful country in the history of the world ever. And if we don't fix and right-size what's going on in the world, we're going to have another global conflict. So they set the trading system up so that it would be uneven. It was coordinated. It was bipartisan. The Treasury and the State Department executed it. And we started out post-World War II in an uneven trading position. And we did that exact very same thing right up into 2000. And then we let the Chinese into the World Trade Organization. And you guys probably do business in China because we're here in Michigan. And what do you know about the Chinese in the World Trade Organization? They're in as a developing nation. So they have way more protective features as a developing nation than we do as a developed nation. And they were onboarding tens of millions of people into the Western consumption-based capitalist experience. And we wanted them to do that because we knew if we lifted them out of poverty, less war. That is a mathematical historical equation. Less poverty, less war. More poverty, more war, more conflict. There's a balance there. So we're lifting them, and they're rising. They're rising. And we're allowing them to rise, and guess what, ladies and gentlemen? They're roughly the same size as we are economically now. And we never did anything to make an adjustment. So even though they're at the same size as us economically, they're in the World Trade Organization listed as a developing nation. Does everybody understand that? We never, our political leadership malpracticed. They never right-sized that. And that's an indictment of Republicans and Democrats. So one last piece of the story. This is the currency piece. A very important piece of this story. It's 1972. Richard Nixon is going to China. But something happened in August of 1971 prior to Richard Nixon going to China in February 72. It's a very big seminal moment in our economic history, August of 1971. What was it, sir?
Took us off the gold standard.
Yeah, see that? You got super smart people up here. So Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard in August of 1971. At that time, we had a price fix on gold versus the US dollar, $35 per ounce of US gold. Sorry, US dollar to the gold. 1971. He took us off because we couldn't afford to keep it there. In July of that year, the Bank of France called our Federal Reserve and said, hey, we just calculated that our dollar reserves here at the Bank of France, we would like all of your gold from Fort Knox, we'd like it shipped over here in exchange for this paper that we're holding in our bank. And Nixon looked at that and said, okay, we can't do that, so he unclipped us from the gold standard. And he had to do it because we were heavily deficit spending in the 1960s to support the Vietnam War, and we couldn't afford to pay it back. So what do we do? Now, I don't have charts here. Just bear with me with this imaginary chart. We were at $35. Richie, where are we today?
$15.50.
Okay, everybody hear that? We went from $35 a share, an ounce of gold, to $1,550 per ounce of gold 48 years later. Everybody following? We devalued our currency 98%. Everybody catch that? Why did we do that? We did that because we can't afford to pay our deficit back. And so we've got to pay the deficit back with dollars that are worth less than the ones that we borrowed. So we started the process of devaluation. Okay, now why is that important in February of 1972? Because Nixon needs help from Chairman Mao. He wants to open to China. That's good political optics. He's an anti-communist. He's there in China, building a relationship. But what does he really want? Him and Kissinger want the help of the Chinese to help them bring down the Soviet Union. Because if you know your history on that Eurasian landmass, the Chinese and the Soviets or the Russians don't like each other. And so Nixon convinces Mao to put 400,000 troops on the Chinese Soviet border, and the Soviets respond with 600,000 troops. What do the Chinese want for that? They want to tie their currency to our currency. Okay, now why would they want to do that? They want to do that because if they begin the process of industrialization, if you remember this from your high school European history, the notion of mercantilism, what is mercantilism? I'm going to take unfinished raw materials into my country, I'm going to finish them, and then I'm going to ship and export finished goods from my country, and I'm going to take your gold and I'm going to take your treasure into my country. The Chinese have built an unbelievable mercantilist economy over the last 40 years. When you are rising in productivity and rising in production, your currency should be going up in value. But the Chinese, they cut a deal with Richard Nixon and they cut a deal with Henry Kissinger. What did they do? They linked their currency to our currency, and what happened to our currency? Went down in value. Okay, and that accelerated their growth by several quantums. Instead of 2, 3, 4% growth, they were growing at 10, 11% growth. When the Soviet Union fell in 1989, did we go to the Chinese and say, hey, we don't need you anymore, we sort of need to get this currency in balance with our currency? Did we do that? Okay, I don't remember us doing that. That's 30 years ago. I don't remember us doing that. What did the Germans do? They did the same exact thing. Okay, so let's talk about the Germans, because they watched the Chinese. This is pretty fascinating. We're going to hook our currency. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to team up with the southern European nations. Some of us are from those nations. What do they do in those nations? They retire at 55. They're swimming naked in the Mediterranean. They're drinking ouzo. I mean, come on, right? We've all been to those places. And what about those places? They have to revalue and devalue their currency every 5 or 6 years. So what did the northern Germans decide they were going to do? Let's clip ourselves to the southern European nations, create a fixed exchange rate mechanism, not a unified currency. Unified currency comes with a federal system. There's no federal system there. There's a central bank, but there's no federal system where there's one federal budget over the nations that are in the euro, like there are over the states that are in the US dollar. There's no federal budget. It's a fixed exchange rate mechanism. That's what it is. We'll put this thing in place. And so what happened was, if you go to your Bloomberg terminal, the Deutschmark should be trading at about a 22% premium to the euro. So what did the Germans do? They clipped themselves, and they had a very cheap currency over the last 30 years to export into America and export around the world. See what they did? So believe it or not, that took me probably longer than 7 minutes, but the president, the candidate, listened to the entire thing. So when he's out there riffing and he says, well, you're ripping us off, he's taking it from the context of what happened as a result of the trading situation plus the currency situation. See that? So those things need to be fixed. One last point, and then I will take the questions. When we went to the president as a group of people in December, the president said recently on his Twitter feed that he barely knows me. He said I had nothing to do with his electoral success. I felt good about that because I don't have to go to confession now because I'm a Catholic. I felt good about that. He said some other mean and nasty things about me, but that wasn't enough for him. He went after my wife. So I want you guys to just think about that for a second. You may be one of his supporters, but I want you to think about the type of personality where he's going after a civilian, a suburban housewife with 2 young children on Long Island that has never said anything bad about him publicly. But he's got to go after her. Okay, so I don't look like Ted Cruz to you. Do I look like Ted Cruz to you? Okay, so I'm an Italian kid from Long Island. Don't go after my wife or my mom or my sister or my daughter. Don't do that. Okay, if you do that, you're going to have a problem with me. Okay, and I think that makes sense to most people in this room. I don't think you would be happy if the President of the United States was going after your spouse who's never done anything to him on Twitter. I don't think you'd be happy with that. But let's go back to this because it's important. It's December of 2016. I'm on the transition team. Even though I didn't know the president, it had nothing to do with his electoral success, I was one of 16 members of the presidential executive transition team. So I don't know how that happened, but there I am. And we're sitting in the conference room and we're talking about the trade strategy. And Mr. President, okay, we got to do this with levels of high predictability, and we have to do this gradually. So if we do it predictably and gradually, we won't upset the supply chain. So you guys know this, but it's worth repeating. It's roughly a 22% tariff differential. It's a little tighter now that we popped tariffs recently, but I'm going back to December of 2016. And it was 24% to send a good from our country to their country, and it's 2.5% to bring a good here. So we said to the President-elect, why don't we do 2% a quarter for 11 quarters, and you'll be at tariff parity in 2.5, 2.75 years. And this way, every single person, every business leader, large and small, will have a path of predictability to adjust their supply chain. Did we do that? Is that how we did it? That's not how we did it. We did it because the president, unfortunately, doesn't like other people giving him advice. He is a very stable genius, and he has a very smart brain, and he knows more than the generals. And so if you're giving him advice like that, he literally will not take it, because he doesn't want a newspaper article written that, God forbid, you gave him advice that he used and you're somehow controlling him. So he did the exact opposite of what we recommended. Okay, let me tell you what he did. He went to the G20 in Canada. He took out a machine gun. He shot everybody in the room in a 360, dropped the gun, and then he flew to Singapore to meet with the president of North Korea. Now, we also told him, well, you could, if you're going to go into a trade war, he tweeted that trade wars are easy to win. Now, there's people in here that have studied history, economic and otherwise. There is no war that's easy to win. There just isn't. You could say Gulf War won, but we never really won it because we didn't even go to Baghdad. We had a no-fly zone over the area for 15 years. Really no war that's easy to win. What did Mike Tyson say? Everybody has a plan until they're punched in the face, and then the commotion starts. Okay, so the trade war obviously is not easy to win, otherwise we would have won it already. It's not easy to win, but what the president did was he created something that we call Trump tariff roulette. He took the wheel out, spun the wheel, shot the marble on the wheel. Some days we're going to have tariffs, then we're not going to have the tariffs. We're going to do 10% tariffs. Well, wait a minute, we're going to do 15. We're going to do it October 1st. No, that's the anniversary of the revolution. Let's move it to December 15th. Okay, wait a minute, we're going to tariff the Mexicans. You got factories moving from China to Mexico. He's going to tariff the Mexicans. Okay, wait a minute, we're not going to tariff the Mexicans. Okay, what are we doing? Okay, we think we got a deal done. It's April. The Chinese switched the deal. Now we're here. Okay, what are we going to do? You know what he did? You guys probably didn't catch this. It was the day the yield curve inverted. He was going to take the lower deal from China. They walked. Why'd they walk? Anybody do business in China? Culturally, if you're going to humiliate and vilify the Chinese, and you're going to do that on the world stage, how are they going to respond culturally? There are people in here that do business with China. Somebody just put the middle finger up over here in the corner. Okay, that's how they would react, right? Okay, you know that because you do business in China. So what do they do? Hey, I don't need to get elected in November of 2020. I'm president for life. Oh, by the way, my team is locked and loaded for the next 20 years. Oh, and by the way, we starved 75 million people from 1956 to 1976. You think we really care that much about our people? You're not going to embarrass us. And so now we're locked. See where we are? We're locked. Now I predict they're going to do a deal with him because he's doing so much damage to the global system, the trading system, and our global alliances that they're going to cut him a deal. They want him to be in that office for another 5 years because he's sitting there not listening to anybody. And if you don't believe me, you can ask his aides, or you can study the thing a little bit more closely. I was in Washington 2 days ago meeting with former cabinet officials and people that you would know. And you know, the stuff is going to start to come out now because it's actually getting serious. Let's just go over this. We told the people on Twitter that the President Xi and Jerome Powell are enemies of the people. Who's a bigger enemy of the people? Then we saw the futures dropping 600 points when the yield curve was inverting because the Chinese aren't ready to deal yet. And then he said, well, they called me last night. Everybody catch that? Did they call him last night? Okay, well, we know that they didn't call him. Okay, and now we're rolling into the hurricane season. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we're lying about the weather. Okay? It's funny, and it's like a Saturday Night Live skit until you realize it's actually not that funny, because he's taking a Sharpie and he's drawing the Sharpie on the weather map, and the Pentagon guys are looking at that, and the guys in the intelligence agencies are looking at that. Okay, wait a minute. If he's lying about that, what happens if something really serious happens and we get something wrong? We got the direction of the hurricane wrong on one tweet. 5 minutes later, the National Weather Service said it's not hitting Alabama. I didn't see what a big deal was. There's business leaders in here. You guys are in an economic club, men and women. You would say, okay, made a mistake, let's move on. I don't know, would you take a Sharpie to the National Weather Map? Okay, so now we're taking a Sharpie to the National Weather Map. Dan Coates, who was the Indiana senator, very good guy, patriotic American. He was the director of national intelligence. He left about a month ago. He took his deputy with him. Last week, for some unexplained reason, the $250 million that was being withheld by the United States government to the Ukraine government was released for some unexplained reason. Now let's go over that, because that's also important. Okay, you guys have to understand, we made a deal with the Ukrainian government in 1994. We said, give up your nukes, and you don't have to worry about the former Soviet Union. We'll protect you in the event of an invasion. So they gave up the nukes. They de-nuked themselves. When Putin's army marched into Crimea, which is part of the Ukraine, did we obligate ourselves to that agreement? We didn't. But we said, okay, don't worry, we're going to sanction the Russians, and we're going to give you all of this military technology, $250 million a year, to protect the rest of the country. But the president was holding it back. Now, I don't know why. I'm not sure why. There's been an allegation reported that he wanted the Ukrainian president to investigate further Joe Biden and his son. Now, maybe they did something wrong. I'm not here to debate. I don't know the answer. Anybody see Rudy Giuliani last night on television? Okay, I don't know. You know, there's a Shakespearean expression, doubt does protest too much. Okay, it was a little crazy, okay, and I've known Rudy since 1989 when I wrote him that check. Okay, so here we are, guys. I can talk about anything you want. I can talk about the economy, jobs, life, owning your mistakes, whatever you guys want to talk about.
Sure, I got a few here. First one's about the qualified investment trust that you've started recently, if you can talk about that. And if you can repeat what I just said a little bit, I'll get this going.
So the qualified investment trust, you're talking about the Opportunity Zone product? So the at SkyBridge, when I got blown from the White House, can't hear me? Is it okay now? So one of the things, you know, one of the best things about being an entrepreneur, when you get fired from the White House after 11 days and blown to smithereens, you go back to your business, okay? But here's the other thing. I tell kids when I'm teaching at these schools, own your mistakes. You know, I made a big mistake. I don't blame it on anybody else that I got fired. But I also tell people, if you're an entrepreneur, you got to forgive yourself. I don't wake up in the morning and kick myself in the pants saying, oh, geez, I made a mistake in the White House. Let me kick myself in the pants and feel bad about it today. And the third thing is, I called General Kelly after he left the White House. He's the one that fired me. And what I said to General Kelly is, let's have lunch. And we had a 3-hour lunch, and he became the keynote speaker at my conference in Las Vegas. He's coming to Abu Dhabi with me, what you mentioned. And we've gotten very close, General Kelly. We make strange bedfellows. But there's General Kelly, 40 years in the U.S. Marines. He lost his son in Iraq. He's an American hero. Okay, and so we'll wait to see what General Kelly has to say about this current situation that we're living in the United States. But now I'm out of the White House, I'm going back to the company, and I worked on that tax reform bill. And embedded in that tax reform bill is a bipartisan idea that actually originated with Jack Kemp and Cory Booker, who was the senator from New Jersey, pushed this through the New Jersey state legislature when he was mayor of Newark. And so we took those ideas, they were Democratic and Republican ideas, and we embedded them in the tax code. So quite simply, what is it? You can have a capital gain. You could sell something tonight. Let's say you have $1 million capital gain. You could roll that capital gain into our real estate fund. As long as you keep it with us for 10 years, you don't have to pay the taxes until year 7 on that $1 million. And then any return that we've made on that money over the 10-year period of time, provided it's in one of the opportunity zones in the United States, is tax-free. And so this was based on the 2010 census, and there's about 8,700 zones. There's one south of here, actually. And you can make an investment in real estate or businesses as long as you hold it in that opportunity zone for 10 years. It's tax-free. So we started one of those funds, and our first project is actually in New Orleans. We teamed up with Richard Branson, who's a personal friend of mine from Virgin, and we're building a Virgin-flagged hotel, which is going to be hooked into his cruise lines. And our investors will get the rate of return off of that hotel, and they'll get it tax-free over a 10-year period of time.
That's great. The SALT conference in Abu Dhabi, is there, what's prompting the move for there for the first time?
So what's prompting the move from our conference to Abu Dhabi? So we do our conference every year in Las Vegas in May. We've done the conference 3 places other than Las Vegas, and we usually do those in the fall. We did it twice in Singapore, once in Tokyo. And one of the things is when you get into politics, you end up meeting a lot of interesting people. There's positives to it as well. And so I met a lot of the members of the United Arab Emirate diplomatic community, and they asked me to consider bringing the conference to Abu Dhabi, and they're helping me sponsor that conference. And so that'll be December 8th to the 11th. And General Kelly's going to join me there with Secretary of State John Kelly, Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, and we're building out an interesting list of private equity and real estate and hedge fund people. And if anybody wants to come, you can ask Rich. We'll send you an invitation. One of the cool things about the conference is we're going to be doing tours of the UAE, including Dubai, and we're also going to have a lot of Middle Eastern experts there. So we try to do at SkyBridge is provide a opportunity for our clients to integrate into some of the research that we're doing around the world.
What do you expect to see as we head into the presidential election further as far as economic plans coming up against President Trump's plan, and what does his look like, and what's he going to be saying?
So I'll repeat it. Yeah, I think we only have one mic, so I'm going to repeat what he's saying. The question is related to the economic plans and the economic agenda of the potential challengers to the president on the Democratic side versus the president's plan, and what do I anticipate will happen or unfold over the next 12 or 18 months, or 12 or 15 months. And so I think the president's plan has pretty much been delineated. He would like to get a middle-class tax cut, but I don't think that's going to happen because of the great polarity inside the Congress and the lack of their willingness to do anything together. I think it's fair to say this, is that he's having a hard time doing a deal related to them not liking him, both Democrats and Republicans, and the lack of a Democrat anywhere in the system wanting to give him any type of a win. And that's really unfortunate, because if they gave him an infrastructure deal, that would be very beneficial to the country. It would also help the Democrats. But unfortunately, we're in a full-blown blood sport now, and so it's going to be very hard for the president to get anything done between now and the election, in my opinion. But if it's post-election and he's president, he'll try to get a middle-class tax cut in place, which may or may not work. What I don't like about these tax cuts is that they're not scored properly, meaning they're wild deficit spending. And so you guys know we blew through $2.5 trillion with the last tax cut over the last 2 years. And just so we're clear on this, if you are deficit spending like that, that's basically unfunded tax liability. So you're offering your current living citizens a tax break, but now you're deferring that liability to their grandchildren or great-grandchildren. And oh, by the way, if you're deciding not to pay it back and you want to keep devaluing, maybe we can take the dollar from $35 an ounce. It's at $15.50. Maybe we can take it to $3,000 an ounce in order to pay it back. But you're really going to cripple lower and middle-class living standards. So you're going to have to address the deficit at some point. But talking candidly, I don't like the Elizabeth Warren plan. My personal belief on that plan, that would be a disaster. A wealth tax in the U.S. sounds very, very simplistic, but what happens is they're coming to tax your wealth, you're moving your wealth. You're either going to give it to your kids, or you're going to move it offshore, you're going to go to protect it. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, you probably know who she is. She's pretty famous now. She said to me, well, we want to take 70% of your income at the federal level, so that means in New York, it'll be 90% of my income if I make over $10 million a year. And she looked at me, well, you're making $10 million a year, that's plenty of money for you to live on. It's the over the $10 million a year. And what I tried to explain to her, I said, well, with all due respect, my money's not in a swimming pool in my backyard in like $100 bills. It's invested in my business, it's invested in my company and the leases of the offices that we have. And if you're going to do that to me, I can't make those incremental investments. So what you're doing is you're stripping me of my income, which I could be putting back into my business, investing in more jobs, or maybe I could put it into Uber or some angel investment that could innovate the economy. And so I understand what you want to do. You want to take my money, I got that, and you think that's the right thing to do, but you're going to cripple the flow of capital in the system. See that? So we have to explain that to people. And so yes, there's going to be a very big tug of war. There's going to be very big tension going into the 2020 election, and there's a real assault on capitalism taking place right now.
My last question, what's your favorite cherry-based product that you've acquired in Traverse City?
My favorite cherry-based product.
As you strolled through downtown today. All
right. Well, I mean, it was not even really a cherry-based product, to be honest, because there's no way there was any cherry in this thing that I was eating, but I was eating these sour cherry balls. You see those things at the Cherry Republic? Okay, I probably had 15 of those, okay, before I said, let me throw this bag out before I get sick. So that was probably my favorite cherry-based product.
Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you. Can I end on one positive note? Before you guys, I just want to end on one positive thing. I think this is very important. And I had this conversation with Mark last night. What was the name of that restaurant, Mark? The Ginger or something?
Red Ginger.
Red Ginger. We were at Red Ginger with a few of Mark's clients. But I want to just explain this to you guys. You're designed biologically to think linearly. We're living in a 100,000-year-old piece of machinery that hasn't evolved. Your iPhone went from iPhone 1 to iPhone 10 in about 10 years, but you haven't had any evolvement. It's the reason why we're getting heavy, right? Otherwise, if we were getting evolved, we would be getting thinner. And what ends up happening is we start to think about the world from that linear perspective, but the world is actually moving exponentially. So I brought up two examples of this, and I want you to think about this because it's a very optimistic way to end this. In the 1820s, Thomas Malthus made a treatise. He wrote a treatise. He was an English philosopher. And what did Thomas Malthus say? He said, we're going to starve. It's going to be a nightmare. Our population is growing exponentially. We can only grow the food linearly. We're going to run out of food, and we're going to starve. You could look up his name, Malthus. But what he missed, because he was thinking linearly about the world, is the growth in food technology, irrigation, genetically modified foods, fertilizer, all of those things that we developed. And now we have more people dying from obesity-related diseases than from starvation. See what happened? Second point, it's the mid-'80s. I'm in a classroom at Tufts University. The professor's telling me we're running out of oil. We're done. 2010, we're done with oil. Jimmy Carter said it 16 times during the 1979 oil crisis. Did we run out of oil? What happened was we developed new technologies. We discovered more oil offshore. We discovered it in places we didn't think it was. And we created horizontal drilling and fracking. And it turns out we have way more oil. And who among us 35 years ago would have thought that the United States would be a net oil exporting nation? Okay, so when you're worried about these problems and the potential intractability of these problems, allow your mind to think more exponentially. Allow it to think about the great innovations in biochemistry, the great innovations in artificial intelligence and robotics, and the unlimited opportunities that we have in the future if we can just avoid a war. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.